Well, happy Thursday on this. Oh, it's always a beautiful day. It's kind of cloudy. We had rain yesterday, and it made me think of the Netherlands where I am from. You have these windy and rainy days, and it was like, oh my gosh, this feels like winter here. Kind of nice, but then I had to turn on the fans again, and it was like the winter feeling was gone. I always like the seasons. But I do love actually the weather in Florida, hot or cold, rainy or sunshine, it's all good. But it always gives you kind of a different feeling. Today we have Danile Roytas. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Daniel. Back with us. He was with us a few months ago now. And he mentioned then that he would love to talk about viruses and more. So we just discussed to add mold and parasites and whatever comes up with that, and all the misconceptions about it, because there are quite a few. And I see many times that, we want to have a cause of our problems and not being in our food because it's so hard to give up the junk food. Let's call it what it is. Most of us are used to eating junk food and not the healthy food so that our body can heal. So I went to Daniel's website just now, and I didn't even realize how much information is there. But his page, and it is humanely.com, humanley.com, and it is also the link is in the description. But the site starts, and I want to read it. It's short. Mother Nature doesn't do disease; humans do. The currently accepted viewpoint is that disease is considered a normal part of life, and the notion that the body has an innate capacity to heal itself is dismissed. The fact of the matter is, Mother Nature doesn't do disease, humans do. The level of sickness within a society is a barometer of how disconnected it has become from nature. We are led to believe that there are thousands of different diseases with hundreds of different causes. Symptoms are frequently blamed as the problem, which ultimately leads to the prescription of pills and potions, natural or pharmaceutical, with the sole focus of symptom suppression. Well, there's a lot to learn more, so I suggest you go there and learn more, because it is so important to understand where it is all coming from, because we consider it normal that we have had headaches, stomach aches, belly aches, really bad menstrual cycles for women, and as if it is all normal, and none of it is. And I've been going through that my whole life, and it's like, yeah, well, it'll go away. Feeling kind of invincible, like, yeah, I'm healthy. I always said I was healthy until I was bedridden, and then I couldn't keep that up anymore. So it is like the sooner you realize what is going on with your body, and that you can actually be in full control of what's going on with you, is pretty empowering. I know it was for me, so I hope it is for you too. So Daniel, I'll give it to you.
Thanks, Toni. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you again. It's always nice to be here speaking with a warm audience and like-minded people. I might just briefly introduce myself for anyone who is unfamiliar with what I do. I spent more than a decade as a senior lecturer, and then eventually a senior lecturer at various colleges and universities around Australia in human nutrition and natural medicine, and quit my job a little over a year ago now, after realizing that what I was actually teaching students in health science degrees wasn't really science at all. And it took a lot of unlearning on my behalf, because I was teaching things that I read in textbooks and thought or believed them to be true. And after I had a bit of a light bulb moment in early 2020, I started looking for the evidence to support all of these things that I was actually teaching, and found that there wasn't really much there. And what I did discover is that actually the opposite to most of the things that I was taught and what I was teaching to students was actually true. So I hope that's a nice little concise introduction as to who I am and what I do.
Well, with what you do, Daniel, from what I can see on your websites and all your videos, your podcasts, you do a lot more. You're definitely a great researcher in being able to implement everything that is going on, and that we need to learn more about it. So we're excited to hear your view on things.
Yeah, I guess I have a unique set of skills, because working at educational institutions and writing curriculum and developing content that is delivered to students enrolled in bachelor level science degrees, you have to have a certain amount of skill to find research papers, and then once you've found them, actually read them and interpret them and understand them. And for the most part, whilst I was doing that for years, writing curriculum and developing courses and things at these colleges and universities, I would just read something and there would be a reference there in the paper, and it would say XYZ has been shown to be the cause of XY condition. And there was a reference there, a little number. And I never really thought to follow that breadcrumb trail and go to that reference and then work my way all the way back to the original evidence that these claims are based upon. So I just regurgitated all of this stuff. And then I started, as I said, in 2020, following that breadcrumb trail, literally looking at the reference that was given in the paper. And then in that paper, there would be another reference. And then in that paper, there would be another reference. And I would just follow it all the way back to the original paper, to the foundational paper, and look at what the claim was. So there were, if we're going to be talking about, say, pathogenic microorganisms tonight, the claim in these papers is that X bacteria causes Y disease, or X virus causes Y disease, or this parasite or mold or whatever it might be, whatever microorganism we're going to talk about, causes a specific disease. And when I went to these foundational papers, actually, the evidence didn't say that at all. These experiments didn't show that any of these microorganisms were in fact pathogenic. And so we've sort of got this side of the story where we've got all this so-called scientific evidence supporting these claims, which is shaky at best. And then we also have a story that we're told that there were great men who did all of these experiments and disproved the old way of thinking that was poisoning and toxicity and nutritional deficiencies and exposure to various other environmental factors, living in squalor, being exposed to toxic air, this kind of stuff, were the actual causes of what are known as infectious diseases. So there were a whole group of people, medical doctors, they were called sanitarians, and they essentially believed that toxins, poisons, poor nutrition, poor dietary and lifestyle, environmental causes basically led to a state of disease which presented as what we would consider to be an infectious disease. It spread through a community. And when you actually read through their papers and what they were stating at the time when the germ theory was coming to fruition, they were saying the same thing that a lot of doctors and scientists are saying now, that there is no evidence for these claims. But nevertheless, what they were saying was basically dismissed, and germ theory was accepted and then thrust into the mainstream. And we're sort of led to believe that no one ever questioned it, that it was just an epiphany of, and all the scientists and medical doctors accepted this theory, and it was welcomed with open arms. And yeah, no one ever questioned it from its inception. But the actual opposite is what happened, the opposite to that story. So what actually happened is that the majority of the medical profession were very resistant to the acceptance of this theory, that germs cause disease. And doctors and scientists were questioning this all through the late 19th century, all through the 20th century, and now even today. So many people are questioning, this concept that microorganisms are pathogenic. But what they're saying is not new. These questions and this sort of perspective has been voiced by many, many people for many, many decades, close to 150 years. It's just that no one ever listens to what they're saying. The mainstream doesn't, and no one ever answers their questions. And they're just sort of fobbed off as quacks, and it's all sort of considered to be nonsense. And I'll hand it back to you after this, but I just have a little example of how much my mind has changed in the last couple of years. When I was studying my undergraduate degree, I think this would have been back in 2006 or 7, I think. There was a class that I was in my undergraduate degree where they were talking about this very concept, that germs don't cause disease. And at the time, I thought, what a load of nonsense. This is old, an old wives' tale. All this has been disproven. Science has proven that germs do cause disease. And as I said, a light bulb went off in early 2020 when I heard this sort of theory come up again. I thought, I've heard about this somewhere before. Maybe there's actually something to this. And as soon as I started to look, I knew it was true. I just had a feeling inside me that what I understood about infectious disease was wrong. And I approached it with an open mind. So I sort of just said, wherever the research and the literature takes me is what I will base my perspective on. I'm not some guy who's just going to start making up random stuff. Like, I'm not doing this for the fun of it. The reason why I'm saying these things is because this is the information that I've come across, and I report it as such. And these ideas are not my own. These ideas that I'm talking about, these concepts, are all ideas that have been published in the medical literature well before I was even born, and even after I was born. And people still continue to publish these concepts and theories challenging germ theory today.
Yeah, but when you look it up, you will see that nothing changes. It is very few people who go against it, and the masses, they just follow, with the bacteria theory. And you see, even it's now even worse than ever before, that just the idea of a bacteria may develop in your body. Go to the dentist, oh my gosh, even if you have a headache, you get an antibiotic. I see it with animals. Anything that an animal has, whatever the problem may be, antibiotics first. And I'm just like, how can we show people to get away from that? And the same is with viruses. I mean, you know, what we have been going through the last 3.5 years, and it still doesn't stop. And whoever I talk to or try to make it clear, it's like, there is a virus. It doesn't matter what I say, and it's like we have to keep teaching people what it really is. And I think we have a long road ahead of us with that, Daniel.
I'm just looking back at a podcast that I did with Dr. Mark Bailey, and I did that with him on the 11th of March, 2022. So coming up on 2 years. And at that point in time, if you actually go and listen to that podcast, I was asking him whether bacteria cause disease, because at that point in time, I was still under the impression that some bacteria cause disease. And I hadn't fully understood what was going on with that. So it's like, if I've only really just come to this realization in the last maybe 18 months myself, obviously people who are hearing this information for the first time are probably very resistant to it, and that's okay. And anyone who maybe is new to this concept, hopefully I can explain what these microorganisms, the role of these microorganisms actually is. So like bacteria, for example, what happens is they've been implicated as the cause of disease because we find them in tissue that is diseased. And in no instance has any of these bacteria that are found in sick tissue have been removed from the tissue and then exposed to a healthy person and been able to replicate the disease. It's never been done, not once. But they have tried. The scientists have tried. They've done this many, many times and failed. So people will say, well, what are the bacteria doing then? Bacteria, they are ubiquitous in nature, on our skin, inside our bodies, in our gastrointestinal tract. And what their role is basically to break down compounds, to ferment things. And they are as much a part of us as the white blood cells of our so-called immune system. So these bacteria are unique to every single individual. The bacteria that you're born with are the ones that you will die with. Now, what happens is when your tissue becomes diseased, so the disease happens first, the tissue becomes compromised, or it loses its vitality, and it starts to decay first in response to a nutritional imbalance, exposure to a poison or a toxin or some sort of chemical, not enough sunlight, not enough clean water, whatever it is. When the tissue doesn't get what it needs, it loses its vitality and it starts to break down. The bacteria then, your own bacteria, come along to that site and start to break down that tissue to remove the dead and dying tissue, and then to help the body rebuild healthy tissue. So that is the role of bacteria. They are saprophytic, which means that they only decompose dead and dying matter. They do not break down healthy tissue. So this is why we see bacteria at the site of disease, but This is why when you introduce bacteria into a healthy person, it doesn't cause any problems, because there's nothing there for the bacteria to act upon. And obviously, when we have an illness and we say have an infection and we get symptoms, people confuse those symptoms with the disease. So they say, oh, I've got a gut infection. I've got some bad bacteria in my gut and I've got vomiting and diarrhea and a fever, and it's the bacteria that are actually causing this infection. The symptoms are the answer to the problem. So, you know, an example of this would be that you eat some bad food and your body then has to mount a response to expel that bad food, because when it's in a state of decomposition or fermentation, there may be toxic metabolic products in that food that could harm your body. So your body wants to get rid of it as quick as possible. So you get vomiting and diarrhea to move it out of the gastrointestinal tract so it's not absorbed into your bloodstream. And then the bacteria get to work. So they increase in number. The specific bacteria that are really good at breaking down this bad food increase in number to break it down and remove it from the body. There are other examples. So say, for example, you're getting exposed to a heavy metal in your drinking water, or some heavy metal in your food, or some arsenic or some pesticide or something, and you eat that. What happens is the bacteria that are really good at breaking down mercury or arsenic or whatever it might be increase in number to break that toxic stuff down, and then you excrete it out. So someone would, if you were sick at that point in time and someone did a stool sample, or they took a stool sample and did a test on the bacteria in your gut, they would find so-called pathogenic bacteria there. But those bacteria did not cause the problem. They are actually there to remedy the problem. So what's happened is we've confused cause and effect. We can liken this to firemen at a house fire. Yeah, the firemen didn't cause the house fire. They are there to fix the problem. If you go to like a crime scene, there's detectives there. The detectives didn't commit the crime. If you go to a marsh outside and there's a bunch of mosquitoes there, the mosquitoes didn't create the marsh. If you're on a farm and there's a bunch of cows around and there's some cow dung on the ground and it's covered in flies, the flies didn't make the cow shit. Yeah. So this is all cause and effect. We understand that the effect of the fire draws firemen to it. The effect of the crime draws detectives to it. The cow pooping on the ground is the cause. The effect is the flies coming to it. Same with the bacteria. And same with fungi and parasites as well. We can look at all of these basically the same way. They are all there to remedy the problem. Viruses are a different kettle of fish because, to my understanding, I'm not sure that such a thing has even been shown to exist anywhere in nature. But yeah, I'll hand it back to you. I think I've probably made sufficient points there that you might want to ask some questions about.
Yeah, we talked about mold, that a lot of people think that they got sick because of mold and they cannot heal despite whatever diet they are working on because of the mold. And I know about mold spores. I lived in a house that actually had black mold behind the walls. At that time, we couldn't do anything about it. When I moved to Florida, we had a leaky roof and found out there's a lot of black mold in the whole area here. And you can see it on the walls on the outside. And I started thinking, and how can it really affect us? We know mold spores can come into your lungs, but what happens then? why I know you have done a podcast about it, so you absolutely know more about it than I do. I haven't seen anything else that yes, the cause of your disease is mold, and that is often the end of it. And I don't really understand how that works, so I would love to hear your insight on this.
Yeah, this is the big thing. Mold. Everyone's blaming mold as the cause of disease. I taught students and health professionals for years and years and years that mold is the problem. And, the medical profession was very resistant to this because they were all saying, well, there's no evidence to support it. And I would go and find stuff that sort of was circumstantial or indirect evidence. It's like, but there's mold in the bathroom and people are getting sick. So just because the absence of evidence doesn't mean doesn't mean that it's not causing the problem. And like I would try and dodge and weave and provide all this sort of indirect evidence to support what I was saying. And then I started looking at this maybe again close to 2 years ago, and I found that what mold actually does is that it bioremediates, it biotransforms, and it biosequesters. So these are 3 words that people can look up: biotransforms, bioremediates, and biosequesters. And I think in relation to mold, they call it mycoremediation, mycotransformation, mycosequestration. And basically what this means is that mold transforms toxic, man-made, and also just naturally occurring compounds into non-toxic, non-harmful metabolites that can then be used by other microorganisms in nature as a fuel source. So yeah, we've all heard of people getting sick when they're exposed to mold, but the mold is not the problem, and there's certainly not a single piece of evidence that shows that mold causes disease. They did try. There is only one human experiment that I've found, and I've been looking for many years. There is one human experiment where they exposed people directly to black mold, and no one got sick. They literally had to put a face mask over people and they pumped black mold spores into their lungs for minutes and minutes on end, and no one ever fell ill. And they stopped doing human experiments after that. I think this was done back in 2002 or 2004, around that time. And never since has an experiment been done trying to show that mold causes disease, because I don't think that they will ever be able to show that. And it becomes very apparent when no one's getting sick from being exposed to mold, that it puts a big dent or a big gaping hole in this theory. So what happens is that when building material in your home gets damp or water damaged, becomes wet, there is poor airflow, there's a high level of humidity in an enclosed room like a bathroom, or an enclosed space like underneath the floor or in the ceiling or in a wall cavity, the building material starts to break down. And the humidity and the moisture creates an environment for the mold to start to grow. And what the mold does is it microremediates, transforms, and sequesters the toxic chemicals that are leaching out of the building material. So the mold is actually there to clean up the mess. But when this building material becomes damp, it off-gasses toxic chemicals into the air. So there are over 300 known toxic chemicals in building materials. This is well established in the literature. And there are human experiments that have exposed people to some of these toxic chemicals that are off-gassed and emitted from building material. they've done these experiments in humans. They've exposed them directly to these toxic chemicals, and they become sick with symptoms that are basically mold illness, mold-related illness, this SIRS type condition, this chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and these associated diseases that we blame on mold have been shown in human experiments to be caused by things like the inhalation of formaldehyde, for example, and these other various volatile organic compounds that are emitted from building material. The other thing that also happens in damp, wet, enclosed spaces with poor airflow, with high levels of humidity, is that there is a production of natural compounds in the air as well. So things like sulfurous acid gets produced. This is just one of many. I think nitrogen dioxide is another one. From memory, it may be another chemical, but I'm pretty sure it's nitrogen dioxide from memory. And inhalation of these compounds in human experiments has been shown to cause symptoms identical to what people are complaining of when they're being exposed to mold. So what we have here is the weight of evidence showing that the compounds emitted from building material when it gets wet in human experiments causes disease identical to mold-related disease. When people are exposed to mold and inhale the mold spores, nothing happens. And this is when people hear it, they go, "Oh, that makes sense." But there are people out there who have vested interests in this premise, this false premise that mold is the problem, because they built their businesses upon this, and they built their reputations upon this, and they refuse to look at this evidence. And the other thing that I will say is that quite often, like I've actually had some building biologists contact me, and they're like, you're onto something, because when we're investigating homes and things, we're actually finding higher levels of mold spores in the air outside of the home. Yet no one ever gets sick when they're outside the home. They only get sick when they're inside the home, and quite often the levels of mold is lower than the outside air. And this is also true of people who walk through a forest or some bushland, right? There is mold and fungi and lichen and moss and all sorts of stuff everywhere outside in a rainforest. Yet I've never heard a single instance of someone getting mold disease from walking through a rainforest. Actually, you hear the opposite. People say, "Oh, I felt so much better when I went for a walk through the rainforest. It invigorated me." So if mold was the cause of disease, by rights, we should have a rich history of evidence showing that walking through a rainforest is bad for you. But it's not. And that's because it is not the mold that's the problem. It is the building material. But see, the reason why we continue to blame mold is because if we actually then attribute true cause and effect to the thing causing the problem, the building materials, what that means is we then have to change the way in which we're building our houses. So this becomes a much broader, much wider societal issue that would only be dealt with by using more environmentally friendly building materials. But it's much easier to blame the mold and go after the mold, because then you don't have to change the way in which houses are being built. And I feel that this is probably one of the other reasons why there's a lot of resistance to people wanting to actually look at this objectively.
Very true. And yes, that light bulb did go on. Thank you so much. I hadn't even thought of that. That is pretty amazing because I had mold, well, pretty bad in my house, or mold. I had these water spots on my ceiling because of a leaky roof after a hurricane. And of course, I had a mold remediation company here, charging an arm and a leg to do a few tests, made holes in the ceiling. In every corner they made a hole that was like a different mold spore, and some were dangerous and others were not. And I was actually quite worried. This is probably 2 years ago. And I was like, now what? I want to be healthy. I don't want to, well, you know how it goes. And so we plugged up all the holes again, because the company to put in a new ceiling and take care of the mold, and that would be only in half of my home. That was $12,000. So I was like, that's not really in the budget. So we plugged up the holes, we painted the ceiling, and paint with special paint, and painted it again, and had another test done in the house, and mold spores were the same as outside, so nothing to worry about. But this is very enlightening. I'm happy that you explained it, because it is so simple, and so it's just so logical. And again, the cause and effect, like Tom said. It is in the chat, if you wonder where that one was coming from. It is, my gosh, what are we going to do with this? I have to put that information in the groups, on Facebook, Telegram, because it is so important. Now, it won't make it easier. I mean, you still have to get rid of the mold, or the cause of why you have mold there in the first place, because a lot of people cannot just move. But it is good to know that the mold is not the cause. And I know of someone that before she rented a place, even if it was just a room or a hotel, she always had a mold test done, and she came to the conclusion she couldn't live anywhere because there was always mold there, and she was always going to be sick. And that is really very, very sad. It's but I'm really happy to know this, and yeah, like Dave says, fascinating. It absolutely is. Thank you so much, Daniel. Now we started.
Sorry, Toni. I just wanted to highlight one point, if I may.
Of course.
Like, why is this important? What I'm saying. Why it's important is, if we continue turning a blind eye to the fact that it's the building material instead of the mold, we're going to be chasing, it's a red herring here, right? So this is why people who have mold-related illness are sick for so long. It's like, oh, I can't get away from the mold. I'm always like, I'm so hypersensitive. The reason why people aren't getting better is because you're treating the wrong thing. You're trying to kill the mold. You're trying to detoxify your body from the mold. Of course, you're not going to get better, because it's not the mold causing the problem. What you need to be doing is reducing your exposure to toxic, harmful chemicals, and then supporting your body's elimination processes and detoxification processes to rid yourself of these accumulated toxins that are insulting your body, right? So this is actually, when you start targeting the true cause, then people start to get better. But as long as we blame the mold, people are just going to be sick for decades. And you hear this all the time with like people who have this mold-related illness. It's so hard to get rid of. No one's got an answer. I don't know what to do. And it makes it very difficult to actually convince people who have been affected by so-called mold that it is the toxic chemicals in their home, because they've almost built a relationship with the fact that the mold is the cause of their problem. They've sort of grown accustomed to this, and a lot of people have spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort going through all of the rigmarole to try and cure themselves of this mold-related disease. So they don't want to look at a potential alternative cause now. It's very hard for them to see what I'm saying. But I do say it in the hope that someone who may be suffering actually hears it and goes, okay, I'm going to try something different here. I'm going to take a slightly different approach. Because the people that have done it, who have looked at this through a different lens and taken a different approach to managing this issue, get results, right? And I'm not here to say how you actually go about doing this. I'm just saying this is something that you should look at through a different lens. And, I would encourage any naturopath or environmental medicine doctor or anyone with an interest in mold-related disease, maybe you should be looking at this through a chemical sensitivity or a toxicity lens, and shift your treatment or interventions accordingly. And it may just give you the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah, it goes with no say that you need to detox, and I believe that once your body is healthier, that you can handle getting rid of the toxins easier. And that is what we are all about. I mean, I'm a detox specialist, so I get to talk with a lot of people who are suffering from high acidity and heavy metals in their body. But it's great to notice also. Thank you very much. Now, I called this podcast, it's that it was going to be about viruses because of all the misconception that is out there. So I hope you can further enlighten everybody here about that topic too, because I keep hearing it. The first time actually that I heard about, the regular things with viruses, it was like, all the diseases that have been there in the past, even centuries ago, that were the cause was a virus. Now we have this big thing with another virus in the last 3.5, 4 years. And there are still a ton of misconceptions there. It doesn't matter if it's the medical industry or it is the alternative, the naturopaths. We still will hear the things that's like, no, this is not it. And I do follow also natural hygiene and what they are saying about a virus. And I know you have a podcast about natural hygiene too. So I would love to hear your insight on viruses also.
Yeah, there is a concept that there are non-living, replication competent intracellular obligate parasites called viruses that can be transmitted from one person to another. And these non-living inanimate objects are the cause of disease. And they have been used to explain why disease spreads between people. And we're told that these are microscopic and they can only be seen with electron microscopes. Yet the fact of the matter is, no one has ever observed said particles in nature. No one has ever observed a virus in the bodily fluids of a human being. Not once, ever. The only time they see these particles is in a cell culture. So cell culture is where they take animal tissue, they put it into a culture flask, they add a bunch of other harmful toxic chemicals to it. And then when the animal tissue or animal cells begin to die, it's claimed that it's a virus that does it. An electron micrograph image is taken of that cell culture, or sometimes just the fluid that's extracted, which is they'll take some of that cell culture and centrifuge it down, and they'll take some of the supernatant and look at it under an electron microscope, and they'll see particles in there. And they'll say, well, this is the virus. Now we can see the virus. So they're only seeing these particles called viruses in cell cultures. And my question is, why can you only ever see them in cell cultures? Why can't you see them in a bodily fluid? And what is said is that there's not enough virus material in the bodily fluids of sick people to see. And this is reported in the scientific literature. Just so people are aware, I've spent the last 3 years doing quite a lot of research into this and read countless papers, at least 2, maybe 3,000 papers, like just spending 60 hours a week just reading and reading and reading and reading. And I accumulated quite a lot of information, and I'm putting all of this into a book, and it's going to be published in a couple of weeks, actually. So it's actually very timely that we're sort of doing this podcast, but it's all about the cold and the flu. And what I found was that the reason why I'm sort of talking about this, how they're saying that there's not enough virus material in a bodily fluid to see. It's very interesting that they would make that claim, because they claim that there are billions of viral particles in milliliters, I think even 1 milliliter of lung fluid in infected people. So they're saying that there's like over 1 billion of these viral particles. And I thought, okay, well, if there's 1 billion viral particles in sick people, in 1 mil of a sick person's lung fluid, how many virus particles are there in 1 mil of cell culture? Well, the cell culture fluid. And it's not billions. It's often in the hundreds of thousands to millions. Right? So they're saying they have to grow it in the cell culture to make enough of the virus to see it, yet they claim, on the other hand, that there's more in the bodily fluids. So you should be able to directly see it. The only time people are seeing viruses is after they've followed a recipe. Yeah, it's like a witch's brew. You know, you add all these things into a culture flask, and then the end product is a virus. And then you make the claim that that is the thing that caused the problem. It's kind of like, this is probably all very confusing for people who haven't heard this before. It's kind of like someone saying, ice cream comes from cows, or an omelet comes from a chicken. I don't know about you, but I've never seen ice cream come out of a cow. I've never seen an omelet come out of a chicken. What I have seen is you take some milk from a cow, you follow a recipe, and you add in some sugar and some chocolate flavoring and some cream and some ice, and you mix it together, and then you put it in a freezer, and then you get ice cream. Or you take some eggs and you crack them open and you beat them. You add some milk and you add some cheese and some salt and maybe some onion or something, however you want to make your omelet. And you put it in a fry pan and fry it, and then you get the omelet. So you followed a recipe to get ice cream and to get an omelet. These things are not found anywhere in nature. If someone was claiming to you that there's definitely omelets that come out of chickens, you'd think they're nuts. Well, this is the same thing with viruses. We're told that viruses come out of human beings. It's the same as what I was saying about omelets and ice cream. Show me. bring the cow, let's observe the cow, or bring the chicken, let's observe the chicken, and let's just let it see it do its thing until such time as ice cream or an omelet comes out of it. You'll never see it. Same thing with viruses. You'll never see a virus come out of a human being. The only time you see them is after you followed the recipe. So what that means is they are man-made particles. They are a consequence of what is being done in the laboratory. Is this hard and true, 100% undeniable, irrefutable fact that there are no such things as viruses? I don't know. There may very well be viruses, and they very well may cause disease. I'm not discounting that possibility. However, I haven't seen any evidence to demonstrate that these things actually exist anywhere in nature. So you have to demonstrate that it exists in nature first to be able to then do a scientific experiment on it to show that it causes disease. And no one's ever done that. So if you can't demonstrate these things actually exist inside a human being, how can we then say that these are the entities that are transferred from person to person that cause illness? No one's ever done it. And I don't think they'll ever be able to do it, because that is not the way that contagion actually occurs. And this is what I go into in my book. There's over 1,300 references in it. I've found over the last 3 years more than 150 human experiments that have been done on the cold and flu. And in every single instance, they weren't able to ever demonstrate that a virus made anyone sick. In fact, in nearly every single instance when they tried to expose the bodily fluids taken from sick people and expose it to healthy people, or even put healthy and sick people in a room, or get them to cough on each other or do whatever, sleep in the same beds, all these kinds of things, no one ever got sick. So we're told that there's this transmission that happens from healthy people to sick people, but it's never really been demonstrated in a scientific experiment. And I mean, we can sort of get into a little bit about what might cause contagion, if you want to, but yeah, I guess that's sort of like a very brief synopsis of virology. And this textbook is essentially a textbook that I've written. I've had it peer reviewed by my peers. So I've had 2 MDs review it. I've also had a virologist review it. I've also had 2 people who are who have science degrees who have reviewed this as well for me. And it's taken a long time to actually put all of these pieces of the puzzle together. And yeah, what I've found is that there is another explanation with contagion and human-to-human transmission. It doesn't have to be, it can be independent of a virus, essentially. These transmission or contagion-like effects can occur without there ever being a need for a contagious or infectious microorganism.
Well, there are often questions about sexual transmitted diseases, HIV, and STDs. Yeah, how would you explain that?
I haven't particularly looked into this at any length, so I don't really feel that I'm knowledgeable enough to talk on this topic. However, I have done a podcast with a medical doctor. His name's Dr. Jordan Grant. He's a urologist, and we actually talk about this. Well, he provides his perspective on what might actually happen. And you know what? It was a while ago since I did this podcast with him, so it's probably best for everyone to go and listen to that. However, he was sort of saying from memory that there's a lot of exchange of bodily fluids that happens during sexual intercourse. There's also like physical tissue trauma and damage as well. So there may be things in these bodily fluids that are not viruses that could potentially cause damage and irritation to tissue. And if you go and look at things that are excreted in urine, in cervical mucus, in semen, in these kinds of bodily fluids, there's all kinds of stuff. There's heavy metals, there's persistent organic pollutants, there's, yeah, you name it. There's pharmaceutical drugs, there's all kinds of things which can be found in these fluids. Now, who's to say that someone may have one of these other compounds inside their bodily fluid that actually causes the problem? This is sort of what Dr. Grant was alluding to in the podcast. So I would recommend that everybody starts there. If you're interested in learning more about HIV, then I would recommend everyone go and look at Dr. Eleni Eliopoulos, Papadopoulos, I think. She's got a very sort of long second two-part last name, but she was a part of the Perth group. And they did a lot of sort of discussion around HIV in the 90s and early 2000s. So that would be the best resource, I think, for people to get more information there about that.
I will do my best to find that information and put it in the description. The first name that you mentioned, that was Graham Grant?
Dr. Jordan Grant.
Jordan Grant, okay.
Grant. Yeah, he's a urologist over in the United States. He was fairly outspoken about all of this going back a few years, but now doesn't really, I think he sort of distanced himself from all of this. And, you know, once my book's out, I probably will too, because it doesn't really, it's, I've spent so many hours looking at all of this. I'm now at the point where it doesn't really interest me much anymore. There's other things that I want to focus my time and attention on.
What is the name of your book?
The name of the book is Can You Catch a Cold?
Oh, it's a good one.
Yeah. And like I'll just say, people will say, well, if it's not a virus, what causes the disease? How come people in a group will fall sick with the same symptoms? One example that I talk about in my book, and people have probably heard the examples about things like scurvy and beriberi and pellagra, all these nutritional related diseases that looked like they were spreading amongst a population. There's also like mercury toxicity, Minamata disease. They thought that was a contagious infectious disease. It was actually mercury poisoning in Japan. Started with one person, then everyone in the same area got the same symptoms and like, oh, this is spreading amongst the population. It must be a virus. This happened with yellow fever. They thought that yellow fever was a contagious infectious virus that was spread from person to person. And they thought this for like 100, 150 years, probably closer to 200 years. They were convinced of it until several doctors started doing research and human experiments into this, where they exposed healthy people to sick people. They took the bodily fluids and exposed healthy people to it, and no one got sick. And the body of evidence became so great that they essentially disproved it as a contagious disease. And then they said, well, now it's got to be a disease spread by mosquitoes. What the doctors at the time were actually saying is that this disease, this yellow fever, is caused by poor sanitary conditions, poor dietary and lifestyle factors, exposure to toxic air, all these living in people living in squalor, living in marsh areas where they were burying dead bodies in the marshes, or they were emptying raw sewage into the marshes, but living in these same low-lying areas. They actually they did some experiments in Galveston, a place in Texas, I think. I can't remember. Galveston. It's an island. I'm not familiar very much with all the geography of the United States, but what they did in Galveston back in the late 1800s was the Surgeon General there. He took the people who were dying of yellow fever from a particular area in Galveston and took them up to the higher ground of the part of the town where there was no disease there. People weren't dying of yellow fever. It took them up, the sick people, up into the healthy part of town, and the disease didn't spread. And no one got yellow fever in the area that was located on the higher ground, because they weren't living in their own squalor. It was much cleaner. People weren't drinking contaminated water, all this sort of thing. So they essentially disproved that it was a contagious virus, but they thought that it was for hundreds of years. And then in the medical literature, they came out and basically said, okay, it's not. We were wrong. And then at that time, the medical profession, this is sort of 1880, they were making calls for every infectious disease to be reclassified as every infectious contagious disease to be reclassified as non-contagious and non-infectious. They wanted every single one of these infectious fevers, like chickenpox and the flu and measles and whatever, to be reclassified. And they essentially said that they were all caused by the same things. You know, exposure to toxins, bad air, polluted water, poor nutrition, living in squalor, poverty, this kind of contributory factors. So like this is one example of how contagion was disproven well and truly. But like it doesn't explain why people get cold and flu, right? Well, we see people in a local or a similar environment or a similar proximity all falling ill with the same symptoms. There are other explanations, and there are a number of explanations which are very valid and have been discussed at length in the scientific literature, but they're never given the time of day because everyone's convinced that it's a virus. So when you actually look at what these alternative explanations are, you go, oh, that makes sense. That's actually makes more sense than the virus narrative.
I was just thinking about, I was going to ask you something, and I lost my thoughts about the cold and the flu. It's when I listen to Lauren Whiteman. I don't know if you're aware of it. She's really big with a natural hygiene group, and that it is just, you know, at times the body need to get the toxins out. We have a flu season. It's usually in the spring after we had all these days with a lot of food, a lot of junk food, a lot of alcohol, and the body just needs to detox, which makes sense to me. Now, that also comes on the topic of parasites. We see a lot on the internet floating around about all kinds of parasite detox, all kinds of people even take ivermectin, you know, a horse dewormer to get rid of it. And it's even, I see it often in many groups as parasites being the cause of cancer. Now, I do believe that it is also part of our life, just as the bacteria in our bodies are. What is your take on parasites?
Same as fungus and bacteria.
Right.
They are just there to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
These parasites may even be, they may exist innately within us. They may not actually come from the external environment and colonize us. They may already be there. They may be created inside our body. I know that sounds really crazy to a lot of people, like, oh, that can't be. But they find parasites in newborn infants, right? So how do they get there? How did the parasite just miraculously end up in a newborn infant? They may come from the outside and colonize the gut. They may do that. But do they cause disease? I don't think so. I'm not convinced that parasites do. I don't think that nature does disease. Mother Nature doesn't do disease. Humans do. So what could parasites possibly be doing? There is evidence in animals where they found that animals that are exposed to certain toxins, like heavy metals and even some pesticides and organophosphates and all these kinds of things, the animals that have parasites in their gut have lower levels of these toxins accumulate in their organs because the parasites actually ingest them in the gut before they pass into the bloodstream and then go and deposit in vital organs. So for example, like I don't know, let's say a fox or a dog or something like this. One dog is getting exposed to a lot of harmful toxins in the environment and the other isn't. Well, the dog that's going to be exposed, or that is being exposed to these toxins, may possibly have more parasites in its gut. But that dog that has the parasites in its gut has a lower buildup of these heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants and various other things, a lower buildup in its tissue than the dog that's being exposed to a low amount of these toxins in the environment. So the parasites are actually providing a protective effect. In animals where they expose them or where they are exposed to these things and there are no parasites in their gut, they have a higher accumulation of these toxins in their internal organs. And you don't want these toxins to be building up and accumulating in the internal organs because then they're going to start to really cause problems. They've, again, done human experiments where they've given people parasites to drink. They've even done experiments where they've taken fecal matter that contains so-called pathogenic parasites and basically squirted that fecal matter up into the rectum of other healthy people. And they didn't get parasite infections. They didn't fall sick. So they have tried and they weren't able to do this, not via the mechanism by which they state, which is like oral ingestion. So if you can't make people sick by giving them parasites to drink, and you can't make them sick by squirting it up the other end, and then you find this evidence that shows that parasites actually protect the body against harmful toxins and things in the environment, sort of makes sense that they might be there to do a job, to rectify the problem. So when clinicians say, oh, we need to do a parasite cleanse, we need to give you anti-parasitics to clear out the parasites, and they'll say we need to give you some anti-parasitic herbs or some anti-parasitic drugs. The drugs may very well be killing off the parasite, and the person feels better. What happens in that instance is when you kill off the parasite, you thereby reduce the ingestion of the toxin by the parasite in the gut. And when the parasite's eating heavy metals and all this rubbish, it's creating its own poop. Like parasites are pooping out waste as well. But what they're pooping out is less toxic than the heavy metal or these other harmful toxins. But the body then wants to clear that stuff out, right? So that's when you get these symptoms like diarrhea or bloating or nausea or whatever, because the body's trying to flush these toxins out. And they also want to be flushing out the harmful chemicals you're being exposed to as well, not just the waste products from the parasites. But yeah, when you kill off the parasites, now you're not getting that waste being generated, and you're essentially getting absorption of those chemicals into the gut. They go into the bloodstream, so they're not the body's not having to flush them out through the gastrointestinal tract. So your diarrhea and your loose stools go away, and your nausea goes away. Yeah. So that's how possibly those anti-parasitics are working. You're actually killing off the parasite, which is there to do a job. It's there to help you. Possibly. I think it is. When you're taking anti-parasitic herbs, I think they work on a different mechanism. I don't think they're actually killing the parasite. What I actually think a lot of these herbs are doing is that they're acting as chelators, so they're binding up to heavy metals and various toxins in the gut, so that the parasites don't have to ingest them. They also help to increase various detoxification processes in the body. So they help to stimulate the secretion of bile and all these other sort of various processes, which will help with getting or clearing out toxic waste from the gut. And by doing that, by binding up to the toxic stuff and then clearing it out quickly, the parasites are no longer required, because the herbs are doing that in place of the parasite. So the parasite basically goes, well, I'm not required here anymore. I can pack up my bags and leave. And the parasite goes away, and you go, yes, we killed the parasite. We're doing the right thing here, and we're making the person better. So I think they're working on two very different mechanisms. Are either of the different options, like, is one better than the other? Well, this would have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. People need to make up their own minds. But you do have to wonder, if you're clearing out parasites and you're still being exposed to these substances which the parasites are there to protect your body against, well, they're not there anymore. That means that stuff's going to go straight into your bloodstream and into your organs and potentially cause more significant systematic problems. So maybe we don't want to be getting rid of these parasites. Maybe we actually want to look way further upstream to the source of the problem, remove the source, remove the exposure, or limit your exposure to these harmful toxins and chemicals. And that may actually be the best course of treatment or intervention. And certainly using some of these so-called anti-parasitic herbs and the like, they may be beneficial to some extent. But it's just a different way of approaching it, a different way of thinking about it. People say that, parasites cause cancer and all this sort of stuff. This is because people's perspective on what cancer is wrong, I believe. The cancer is not the problem. Like, the body doesn't do anything wrong. No disease is a problem. Disease is the answer to the problem. It's like a cold or a flu. Like, a cold or a flu is not a disease. It's a mechanism by which the body rectifies a problem. Same with like a fever, same with diarrhea or vomiting or inflammation or elevated cholesterol or elevated blood sugar with cardiovascular disease and diabetes, even obesity. Like all of these things are the body's mechanisms to protect itself and to try and maintain homeostasis in a less than optimal environment. So the cancer is actually there to do a job. The cancer is there if you're putting like a whole bunch of rubbish into your body and the body can only clear 90% of it. What's it going to do with the other 10%? May the body say, right, well, we're going to get a rubbish bag, and that 10% stuff that's left over, we're just going to put it into that rubbish bag and just chuck it in the corner until such time as you've sorted out your life and you're eating better and you're not being exposed to all this rubbish. We'll just keep putting rubbish in the bag. But that bag gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then one day you start to get a bit of pain. You go to your doctor and they do a scan. They go, oh, there's a big bag of stuff there. That's the problem. Let's go and poke a hole in it and see what's in there. Rubbish just goes everywhere throughout your whole system. So the body's actually encapsulating all the rubbish that it can't get rid of and putting it over in the corner out of the way until such time as you clean up your act. So this is possibly what cancer is actually doing. So if parasites are there to protect you against absorbing some of this stuff, maybe this is guilt by association. It's like, I've got parasites in my gut and I've also got cancer. Therefore, parasites are bad. Parasites equal cancer. Maybe both of those things are actually working for you to protect you against these harmful man-made things that we're just being bombarded with left, right, and center.
Thank you so much for that explanation. I love it. It's good to know that the way you explained it as a big bag full of rubbish, it's exactly that. I love it. Well, Daniel, we are already a little over the hour, and I always like to keep it, around this time. I want to thank you so much for your amazing insights in the topics that we touched on. And I urge everyone to buy your book. Is it already available or is it soon to come?
It will be available hopefully very early in December.
Okay.
So if people want to stay updated, just go to my website, www.humanly.com, humanley.com. And you can just subscribe and I'll send out an email to my database when it's ready to go and you'll be able to get it on Amazon.
Yeah, I will definitely promote it in the groups because I think it is important. It is important that people can take control of their health, and this is just part of empowered people. So again, Daniel, thank you so much for being here. It is highly, highly appreciated by all of us. So I would say till the next time.
Thanks so much, Toni. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you.
Yeah, and for everybody else, I love for you being here. Thank you for being here, and till soon again. Bye-bye.